You are Sint Maarten. You are Sint Maarten.
The URSM, the Unified Resilient Sint Maarten Movement, being a political movement, will be hosting a weekly radio program called You Are Sint Maarten every Wednesday from 6 to 7 p.m. on the Radio Mix 94.7 FM. I myself, Dr. Messalina, the political leader of URSM, will be hosting this radio program in which current issues, actualities and general topics will be discussed with the people of Sint Maarten. So join us every Wednesday on Radio Mix 94.7 for our radio show You Are Sint Maarten.
You are Sint Maarten. You are Sint Maarten.
Dear people of Sint Maarten, good evening. Welcome to your radio program You Are Sint Maarten on Radio Mix 94.7 FM. As you know, this is a radio program that we broadcast on a weekly basis, in which we try to keep the people of Sint Maarten informed about current topics. I myself, Dr. Messalina, will be your host in this radio program. As you know, I'm a surgeon here in Sint Maarten, working at the Sint Maarten Medical Center. And since October last year, 2020, I am the political leader of the newly launched political movement URSM, standing for Unified Resilient Sint Maarten Movement. This political movement, being a political party, will contest the upcoming parliamentary elections of country Sint Maarten. As you know, URSM stands for putting the people and the country above self and believe in educating the people of this country. We strongly believe, for example, also that there should be a sound balance between economic growth in our country and the welfare status of our society. We are, as I said, presenting a weekly program in which current topics, community developments and community issues and general matters concerning the people of Sint Maarten are discussed. Every week again, we try to present a topic that we believe, and I believe as leader of the URSM, is a topic that concerns the people of this country, that I think it's worth for us to be well informed about. And that is the reason, hence, that today I decided to invite a special invitee in the name of Mr. Edward Jacob. Mr. Eddie Jacobs, good evening. Welcome to our program.
Good evening, Doc. Thank you for having me here.
Thank you, Mr. Jacob, for you the same. Thank you for taking your time out to be in the radio program of the URSM. Mr. Edward Jacob is a very known person in our community. And actually, the reason why we invited him today to our program is because he is a member of the Rent Committee of Country Sint Maarten. Mr. Jacob, before we go into the topic of the whole rent issues in Country Sint Maarten, I would like you to use your biography as a background context to introduce yourself to the people of Sint Maarten.
Okay, Doc. I was born in Sint Maarten on September the 6th, 1947. At a young age, I went to Curaçao, where I got my education. I finished MULO, and being that I had some rough experience with the Dutch teachers in the MULO, I refused to go to Holland to continue my study. And in 1966, I decided to join the Netherlands Antilles Police Force. I went to the police school. I passed the exam at 1967. In 1968, on October the 14th, I was sent to Aruba to work because our class, the complete class, was geared. They were planning to send all of us to Aruba to continue our studies there and work there. And in 1970, I became a sergeant sergeant. And from there, you could go by specialized department. And there was a bicker between the head of the detective department and the head of the traffic department, because both of them wanted me. And at the given moment, I was a person that used to be all over, playing baseball, playing bass, domino, the pool, dancing, and the thing. So I was on a rounder. And then I heard the chief of detectives telling the chief of the traffic department, certain type of people, he don't want them by the detective department. And I heard it, I was close by, and I told him something that was not nice. And like that, I went to the traffic department. I worked there until 1973. And from there, I was sent to the airport, immigration, as acting head of the immigration department at the airport. And in 1976, Mr. Remy Zandam, who was the chief of police on Sint Maarten, came back to Aruba, and he saw me at the airport, and he asked me, "But Eddie, what you doing here?" I said, "I'm working here, I'm teaching and things." He said, "No, you have to be by the detective department." And he said, "Listen, I've heard all the information you submitted to the detectives, the solved cases, so you have to go by the detectives." And in less than a month, I ended up by the detective department. And 1977, I passed as a major. Then I was working by the detective department in St. Nicholas. But whenever there were cases, let's say in Orion Stad or wherever, big cases, I was asked to go and help the detectives in town. And one person who was very adamant for me to work with them was Kojak. That's Ezekiel Josefa. And afterwards, he asked me, he told him, "Listen, Jacobs have to go to the narcotics department." So he was head, I became acting head. In 1979, I was transferred to Sint Maarten for 1 year because the head of detectives here, Mr. Monsanto, had to go to Aruba for training. And in 1980, I returned to Aruba and was acting head of the narcotics department until when I came to Sint Maarten in 1985, December the 15th. And then I was acting head of the detective department here until Mr. Monsanto went on pension in 1987. And there I became the head of the detective department.
Of Sint Maarten. Of Sint Maarten.
Yes, of Sint Maarten.
Of
Yes.
Sint Maarten,
Yes.
of course. And all of a sudden now you're in pension now.
Yes,
for a few years already.
I did not stay at the police force until my pension because I had some problems with the marechaussees. The marechaussees had problems with me then,
Okay.
right?
And then you left.
Yes, and
early.
then I left in 1991, and I went to work for the island government as executive assistant advisor.
Okay.
And I can remember in 2002, I worked with different commissioners. And in 2002, the head of the Control, Inspection, and Security Department passed away, who happened to be my brother-in-law. And the Lieutenant Governor, Mr. Franklin Richards, called me and said, "Eddie Jacobs, you're the only person that can take up the department from one day to the other." And I was placed there until I went on pension in 2007.
In 2007.
Yes.
Okay. Mr. Jacobs, the reason actually that I have invited you today in the program of You Are Sint Maarten, inspired actually by the URSM, the Unified Resilient Sint Maarten movement, is because you are a member of the Rent Committee of Country Sint Maarten. And seeing the challenges that our country are going through, especially in the beginning initiated by Hurricane Irma, and afterward, of course, by the pandemic that is still a threat in the world, These developments, of course, had a significant effect on the socio-economic status of each country, and also, of course, in Sint Maarten. So I thought it would be great to invite you for us to discuss a little the matter of the rent issues here in County Sint Maarten, and the people that are in the group of persons renting in Sint Maarten know about what their rights are, etc. But first we go into details. I would like to ask you if you could explain me how this rent committee is actually structured. How is it organized?
Okay. For me to go there, I have to start from the beginning. When we had Curaçao met with the attachment with Aruba and the other the 4 islands from the Netherlands Antilles. And I can remember when not what the history says, when the people start coming from abroad to go work at the refineries, everybody all over Aruba, Curaçao, everybody rent the houses or the property at the price that they wanted. Mm-hmm. And in 1939, the government decided to institute a law so that people don't overcharge the tenants, that because a lot of people wanted places to rent because they came here to work, they have no place to live. And there is where the rent tribunal started. After 1954, that we became country, the Netherlands Antilles, and the head office from the rent tribunal was in Curaçao. And when, for instance, Sint Maarten had a case that has to be dealt with, people from Curaçao used to come here to deal with it until 1957, when the federal government gave Sint Maarten the opportunity to form their own rent tribunal, and that the local people were doing the hearings right here on Sint Maarten. You see, the law at that time, well, it was good, but for what it was at that time. But I think the law remained there too long because there were so many changes, and most probably the members of the committee, they saw that they could work easy with it, but I think you needed people who look forward. There are changes and things are becoming more difficult. I've been a member of the committee about 10 years now, I believe, or maybe more. And at the given moment, we started bringing up ideas, brainstorming, sending proposals to government to get changes.
Actually, Mr. Jacobs, when we became a country in 1010, actually we just took over the Landsverordening, the national ordinance that was regulating the rent matters for each country, but we just copy-pasted and we took it over from the Netherlands Antilles. So we started in that way with the law that was dealing with issues concerning renting of properties. Since 1010, there should have been some amendments in the law that we started with initially being laws that was serving the Netherlands Antilles. What are actually the changes that took place with the Landsverordening concerning rent issues for country Sint Maarten?
Okay, when we had the law, the federal law from the Netherlands Antilles, it stipulated that for the rent tribunal, for instance, to evaluate the maximum amount that a landlord can charge for a rented property was 150,000 guilder if the value of the property, that means the building and the land of it, was not more than 150,000 guilders. Then the rent tribunal could establish the maximum price that the landlord can charge for his property to rent it. And after 1010, we see about 150,000 guilders. In Sint Maarten, it's very difficult for you to find a property, something reasonable to do it. And we proposed, I think it was 300 to increase it to 300,000
Guilders.
guilders. Yes, we're speaking about guilders. And then I believe the persons who worked on this land broadening, let's call it federal law, they came up with a sum of 200,000 because they made a comparison with Curacao and Aruba. And that comparison, we told them it was not realistic because in Curacao and Aruba, the labor is not as expensive. The type of building that they had over there, the type of building that you will have to build here in St. Maarten had to be able to sustain hurricanes, and all of that make it more expensive. But it was passed by our parliament, and it was 200,000.
So actually, Mr. Jacobs, if all properties under the 200, until the 200,000 guilders, if there is a conflict between the tenant and the landlord, actually we can apply and see if we can get some advice and intervention from the rent committee. If the property is now above the 200,000, am I allowed still to get information or ask the rent committee to intervene in my conflict?
Yes, everyone is welcome to the rent tribunal for advice, because actually everyone that have, let's say for instance, you build an apartment complex or you build a house or whatever to rent, before you start renting it, you have to go by the rent tribunal and then for them to establish the maximum price that you can charge per apartment. Because some people say, no, I have a complex, I have 20 apartments. Well, it costs more than 200,000 guilders. That is not the case, because you have to go by the price, the amount that one unit costs. If you build a house and you're going to rent it also, we will ask for the maximum, the value of the property is. And then, because the law says you may not charge more than 12% of the value of the property per year. 12% if it's for living purposes. If it's for business purposes, maximum is 14%. So at the given moment, we have seen in that apartment complex are coming up and people going to rent, and then the tenant comes and tells us that they find the rent is too high, and then we go and we verify and we establish the maximum amount that the landlord may charge for that unit.
But even if the property is worth more than 200,000 Antillian guilders, your estimation of the rent price is still valuable for the tenant?
No.
Because actually your right is to give your opinion for properties still to 200,000.
Yes,
okay.
But we advise the landlord that your property costs 250,000, right?
Yes.
So 12% you can charge no more than 12% in a year of the value of your property. So that is the law.
Yes.
And the law is in general. It's not only for properties on 200,000 or less.
Okay. Mr. Jacobs, there is in this country a need for social housing, and there is also a need for affordable housing. As a leader of this Unified Resilient Sint Maarten movement, it has my attention, and I do realize that there is an enormous challenge for housing for the people of this country. Next to the fact that it's a very tense market, I do believe that the rent at this particular moment is too high. Do you share this opinion with me that the rents in Sint Maarten are too high?
Yes, we of the Rent Tribunal, Rent Committee, we share that opinion, because we even send a proposal to government, right, where we spoke to them, explained them that there's a need for social housing, especially after Irma, with the situation that followed after Irma, it's a imperative, something that government has to look into. So I think they are busy studying it and seeing what they can do.
What do you think the rent committee can do to try in their way to control a little the too high rent prices that we have here on the market? What do you think the contribution of the rent committee could be?
Well, you see, we are rent tribunal, rent committee. We also advise government. We send proposals to government, which goes to Parliament, and Parliament will have to study those items, and then Parliament will change the law or amend the law accordingly, because those are things that we have done. You see, and that is why I said in the beginning that years ago, the committee members, they were working, they're doing what they had to do, but we are more community concerned, and we are, for that reason, we see who are coming by us. We see how the people, some people live, and it's in Sint Maarten is blooming. Everybody says a lot of money passing through Sint Maarten, but if you go and see how people living, I say it's a shame.
It's a shame for this country. I believe that too. That is also one of the reasons, Mr. Jacobs, that I thought we can't continue the way we are heading with this country. There is the impression outside there that there is a lot of money, as you said, going on in this country. And on the other side, the people living in this country are suffering, are in poverty and in cry. And I do believe that that should change. And that is one of the reasons also that I decided let's start this Unified Resilience Sint Maarten movement. Because I have the feeling and impression that the sitting governments are not realizing or are not taking the people serious when they are complaining that the rent in this country is too high and there are not much possibilities of social housing for the lower class in Sint Maarten. And I do think that should become one of the priorities of the upcoming government, because I do not foresee that this sitting government has this high on the priority list on their governing agenda. But hopefully the people their eyes will open, that they will realize that they will have to bring some changes in their voting behavior to give others a opportunity to govern this country, because actually if we vote in the same way that we are accustomed to, we are going to get only more of the same. Mr. Jacobs, we have a lot to discuss still, but the time is going very fast. We are just going for a small break, and we will be back in a few minutes. Dear people of Sint Maarten, welcome to the second half of our radio program, You Are Sint Maarten. As I've said already in the first half of our radio program, today we have as invité in our program Mr. Edward Jacobs. And I invited this gentleman to come to be in our program because he is a member of the Rent Committee of Country Sint Maarten. Mr. Jacobs, can you give us some examples, the reasons why people consult the Rent Committee? Give me some examples. I can imagine, for example, that you feel that the rent that the landlord is asking is too high, but I can imagine that there are several other problems or issues that there could be reason to consult the Rent Committee too.
Yes, of course. There are so many problems that we have to deal with. The most problem that we have is when the tenant is not paying. They lack 3 months or more. The landlord will come to the rent tribunal, will file a case, we'll have a hearing, and then we can take a decision. But after we take a decision, both parties have the right to appeal our decision by the court, and the decision of the court stands. If nobody appeals, our decision stands, right? Also, the tenants, let's say you rent a unit, a house or whatever, and you find that what you're paying is too high, you can file a request in writing to the rent tribunal for them to establish the maximum amount that the landlord can charge you. because I can remember years ago people were paying $300 for I not even call it a shack, something that not even $100 you wouldn't even pay for. So you see, some landlords believe because a person lived there for 6, 7, or 10 years, they can automatically raise the rent. If you want to raise the rent of a unit that you have been renting to someone, you have to ask permission. You have to come to the rent tribunal. The rent tribunal will go do their job, what they have to do, due diligence, and after that, the maximum price that can be charged for that unit will be submitted to tenant and landlord.
And the landlord has to adhere to the advice of the rent committee?
Of course, they have to. If they don't agree with our decision, they can take it to court. Right? They can take it to court, but in principle, once if they don't take it to court, there's no file, no appeal against our decision. That is the maximum price they can charge.
Okay. As I spoke with you in the beginning, I was quite impressed about the amounts that are being asked nowadays for renting of places, of houses, apartments, and I have still my doubt if the landlords are following the guidelines of the rent committee. And if I'm a landlord, I just ask a price that I think that it should be worth it to ask a tenant. But on the other side, if the tenant does not go against it through the rent committee, I think the landlord has the carte blanche just to continue persisting on the asking price that he started the negotiation with. That's correct.
You see, and that is why I said, when that landlord build a house and he's planning to rent it, the apartments, they have to come to the rent tribunal and say, listen, I want to rent this property. Can you establish the maximum? If it's under 200,000, we have to establish the maximum price they can charge for that that building or for that unit. But a lot of landlords do not do that. And what we did in the past, like they say it in Dutch, salva of our own. We see apartments built up. We go and we start checking. And some of the landlords didn't get mad, but they didn't follow the law. They didn't come to us to do what we have to do. So we establish the price, and if we send them the resolutions, if they don't agree with it, they can go to court also.
You spoke just now about two conflict situations that you can have. On one side, for example, that the landlord comes to the committee and says, listen, I'm renting out a place here, but there is a backlog in paying of rent. That's a good reason to get in contact with the rent committee. On the other side, it can be also, as you said, that the one that is renting, the tenant says, listen, I'm paying this amount, but I think and I feel that it's too much for what I'm getting for that price. These are two examples that you gave just now. On the other side, can you give me now a few examples of misconduct or misbehavior on the side of the landlord, that the tenant comes and say, accept that the price may perhaps be too high? Are there other conflict situations that are very common when they approach you from the rent committee?
Yes, sorry. At a given moment, we have this phenomenon that landlords, they build the main house, and in the back of the house, they build apartments. And then they can use their meter to supply all those apartments with electricity and water. But now, they charge whatever they feel like for water and light to those persons. Now, the law doesn't give the rent tribunal any power to deal with light and water, because once you're renting, it becomes a commercial building. So my property, my house, I have a normal meter, but once you're renting, you got to get a commercial meter, and then it's going to be different than the normal living person that's living in his own apartment. And what landlords do then, they cut off light and they cut off water, which is irresponsible, because those are the first means of living that a person need. They need water, they need light. So if you rent them light with light and water, you cannot, they're paying the same amount, but now because they didn't pay the water light 1 month, you can cut it off. That's why we tell them, folks, we do not deal with it, or you go by GB, or your landlord have to give you permission to go by GB and establish a contract with GB that they can put your own meters for you.
This practical problem, do you have a suggestion how it can be solved? Because as you said, if there is 1 meter supplying the whole complex, how can I control what my consumption is of water and electricity?
Well, you see, some landlords put special meters, but I do not know we don't know if those meters are calibrated.
Yes.
And at the given moment, I think there is a job there for GEBD, because to go and check those items, because according to, as far as I know, you may not sell electricity because that person is selling electricity.
Yes.
So I think GB has some work put away there. The more meters they have, they know exactly, but if 1 meter is so sky high, you have to ask the question, but why?
Yeah. Actually, it's illegal to renegotiate the price for water and electricity.
Correct.
The way the landsverordening is set up now. Good. What other means, Mr. Jacobs, do we have now to handle a disagreement between a tenant and a landlord? For the first place, I can go to the rent committee. Are there other ways or means that I can solve my problem in a disagreement with my landlord?
Yes, there are certain problems that is the police will get involved with it, right? And because if it becomes something violent, that the landlord or the tenant, they become violent towards each other, it becomes a police matter, right?
And that happens very often too.
Yes, but at a given moment, the police cannot tell a tenant, because you fought with your landlord or you did this, if we give you so much days, you have to move because the landlord said so. The termination of a rent agreement can only be done by the rent tribunal or the court. Right? Because if the landlord say, listen, I want this person out by the end of the month, and the police patrol is there, the police cannot tell a person, you heard what the gentleman said, the lady said, by the end of the month you have to be out, else we're going to come and check you out. The police has nothing to do with that.
Mr. Jacobs, as I said in the beginning of this program, I find the rent amounts that are being charged nowadays too high for the people of this country. There is enormous, people are being challenged nowadays. Financially, it's a difficult time for everybody, especially considering the impact of the pandemic. And in the last election, there were politicians, and there was even a slogan, rent too high. People believed them, and they even voted for them. And after the elections, you see that there was no follow-up on this campaigning sentence of rent is too high. What is the best way for us to see if we can get a better control of the asking rent price for properties? That means that we have to go back to that 12% and that 14% if it's a business property to calculate the rent. That means that the landsverordening, the national law on this issue, has to be amended in Parliament. That is the way you think is the only way to get a better hold of the rent price nowadays?
Correct, because this is a federal law. And for any changes to be made in the entire rent situation from top to bottom, it's only Parliament can change the law. So we can make proposals, and then Parliament will have to deal with it. But if nothing is done, the prices are still there, and they can go up more than they are.
So you will have to have political goodwill to touch base on this issue and make the necessary adjustments and amendments in the law to be proposed to Parliament for us to amend them. And at that way we can get a better hold and control of our rent prices, of course.
Correct.
But the way we're talking about is that everybody's waiting for the rent price to drop. But if we don't change our law, we have no reference of a way of handling this problem.
You see, I can even go further on that because I can remember after Irma, the Minister of Finance made an announcement and he requested landlords to put their hand over their heart because things are bad with people. People lost their job, etc. And after the pandemic started also, but you can request the landlord to lower the rent. But the landlord, he's doing business, and if you can't pay, he gonna look some way to get his money, and some people, yes, some people did that. They give the persons leeway for a certain amount of months, but some of them gave them a leeway. And what happened? After a year, they tell them, listen, don't forget, you have those 12 months there. They still have to pay me, you see? So you didn't help the person still.
Actually.
You see?
Mr. Jacobs, another thing that is very often an issue is the demand for a deposit. When you make a deal, okay, I'm going to rent a place, the landlord tells you that's okay, there is a deposit to be paid. Is that obligatory to impose a deposit before I can rent a place? Or is that a habit that we do with each other to safeguard the property, let's put it that way?
Okay, the deposit is a agreement between landlord and tenant. The rent tribunal has no saying over the amount or nothing to deal with deposit. The deposit is to safeguard when the tenant is leaving, if there are damages inside the building that were not there when it was rented out, then they will use the deposit to repair the damages, and what stay over, what remains, they'll have to give it back to the tenant. Now, we advise landlord and tenants, when you're going to rent a property, make sure you have a checklist. A checklist that you have everything documented, what was good, what was not good. The landlord will have to fix this and so forth. When you're leaving, also, you need a witness, have a witness with you, landlord with witness, to check the property again. And if it's in good order, then the landlord will have to return you your deposit. If they don't want to return it, then you have to go to court.
Or to the rent committee. No, actually, no. But you cannot go to the rent committee because the rent committee has nothing to say about deposits. So this will end up in court.
Yeah, not in courts. Now, some landlords, what they do, they tell the tenant, listen, you pay your deposit, and at the given moment, when you're leaving, we can inspect the building, and for the last month that you're going to be there, you do not need to pay, because we're going to use your deposit to cover the rent. You see? So when they check the apartment or the house and everything is under control, they say, okay, you're leaving next week. They can tell them before, because that's in the contract. They sign a contract that the last month that you're going to be there, the deposit will be used towards your rent.
Mr. Jacobs, there is a very sensitive topic nowadays concerning property tax that actually Sint Maarten is not paying at this particular moment. And people are looking in all directions to see what for actions can be taken to increase the revenues for the coffers of government. On one hand, I do understand that we have to see what we can do to increase the revenues in this community to keep this country going. On the other side, if you introduce, for example, a property tax that is actually also politically a very sensitive topic, the logic part of it is that when you introduce that, the people will say, okay, if I have to pay property tax, I'm going to increase again the rent price because at the end of the year I will have to pay the property tax back to government. I foresee, of course, good things with a introduction of a property tax, but I see a lot of negativism also if we go in that direction because of the consequence of probably the increase of the rent that is already very high in Sint Maarten. What is your take on this, Mr. Jacobs?
Well, personally, because we didn't sit down and discuss, have a meeting as a rent committee about this already, but I'm seeing if there's a property tax going to be implemented on properties, automatically the price of rent's going to go up because the owner of the property will incalculate what he have to pay in property tax, and that will make the amount of that property much higher than it is at the moment. And there was something else there because, for instance, people then rent parcels of land to people. If you rent a parcel of land from a landlord to build a residential building, a house for you to live, the rent tribunal can have decision over that agreement. But if that piece of parcel of land was rented and you put a business on it, then the rent committee has no saying over that. If there's a dispute, those persons will have to go directly to court.
Okay. Mr. Jacobs, something else about a termination of a rent agreement. Can you give us some information how actually we can handle terminations of rent agreements in this country? Is it we will always have to adhere to the contract that we had when we signed that we're going to rent this place, for example, for 2 years, and imagine in between I decide, no, I want to leave. How can we deal with this termination of rent agreements?
Well, you see, what is stipulated in a contract, it's an agreement between two persons, but the possibility of moving away from what you sign, the only way you can do that is go to the rent tribunal and present your case, what is happening, and then the rent tribunal will take a decision. For instance, let's say the tenant have to leave in April now. The contract is finalizing in July. So now to make sure that this person will leave in July, the landlord will have to file a case with the rent committee in due time, let's say from April now, so that the case can be dealt with, and both parties will get the resolution stating that by that date, July the 31st, the tenant will have to vacate the property. Now, if the person file a case and because of rent is owed, a lot of rent is owed, or the person is a bad renter, they're not paying on time, or they're not paying how they're supposed to pay. If I tell you, deposit the money on my account, and you're going to bring $1,000 and throw it on my porch, that is not, they can also ask termination. And the termination, we will give the date that it can be terminated, but then the landlord has to get involved with the marshal after the follow-up procedure, and then if the person does not want to leave, the marshal is the person that will evict the tenant from the building.
Okay. On another note, Mr. Jacobs, do I have to be the owner of a property to rent this property out?
Of course.
I have to be.
You have to be property, because if you renting property belonging to someone else, you have no title. I mean, it's almost like you're squatting, you're using a title that you don't have. It's the same thing with inherited land. For instance, there are parcels of land. You have 15 family members who have right to that property. One person alone cannot take decisions
Yep.
because everybody, all 14 or 15, have to sign to give permission for that one person to do whatever they want to. And that is the problem, that we have a lot of land open, that because there's no good communication between the person who inherited the land, and so that's why it can stay there. Nobody can do nothing with it.
Okay. Mr. Jacobs, we are running out of time. It is a very interesting topic that we are discussing here in our radio program, You Are Sint Maarten. We can draw some conclusions, though, that, for example, what we realize and we know that there is a enormous need for social housing in this country. And I'm very impressed that the government is not taking this issue serious, while I do believe it's one of the basics that you need in life is a roof on top of your head. And I do not understand why the government of this country is not putting this as priority number one for the people of this country. Secondly, next to the need of a social housing, I do believe there is also a need for affordable housing for country Sint Maarten. You have people from the middle class that would like to buy a house, and I think people should have the right to buy something and invest in something, have a reason why they work hard to invest, to leave something behind for their kids. And in this case, what is disturbing them to do that is, of course, that the mortgage interest rate is too high. As a leader of the URSM, I have thought that I think a way to solve this problem, to get a better hold and control of the high interest rate for mortgages, is to try to establish a national ontwikkelingsbank, a development bank for country Sint Maarten, that can give mortgages or loans to people at a significant lower interest rate. And in that way, by lowering the interest rate, the monthly obligations of the individuals go down. And that would be a nice impulse for them to invest and try to buy a house that they can leave behind for the kids after they have lived their own life, their whole life in them. Secondly, the third conclusion that I think that we can draw is that the rent in Sint Maarten is too high. We have the landsverordening that goes about determining the rent prices for country Sint Maarten. And as you said, if we do not change the rules that determine the prices for the rent of properties, if we don't amend these laws in Parliament, it will not be able for the people to get relief for the high prices that they are confronted with. All politicians outside there are screaming that the rent price is too high, but it's no time anymore to just scream about this. No, it's time for us to take action. It's time for us to present amendments in Parliament and adopt these amendments, so it can be a organic law again that we can execute and try in that way to control the rent prices here in Sint Maarten. I see a big negligence here in Sint Maarten concerning the government, while this is a very important issue in our community, and that is the reason also that I hope that the URSM will get the mandate of the people in the upcoming elections for us to take over government of this country and really take care of the issues that are challenging the people of this country. Mr. Jacobs, one more thing, I would like to thank you. A lot of people don't know, but you are a personal advisor of me too, and especially now that I'm taking a big responsibility on my shoulders to try to present a great unified resilient Sint Maarten movement for country Sint Maarten. I have a lot of knowledgeable people and experienced people backing me up and advising me, and you are one of them. And en publiek, I would like to thank you for your extra mile that you're going in your advices towards me and towards the URSM for us to get through with the challenges of this country. I would like to thank you also to be present today in our radio program. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to thank you for your attention, and I'm looking forward to see you back next week, Wednesday, between 6 and 7 o'clock p.m. on Radio Mix 94.7. Thank you for your attention and have a great evening.